everyone, and welcome to the July 4th edition of the Sports Section. Fireworks going on TV in your neighborhood. Lots of noise. If you hear any superfluous noise coming through our microphones, it's because our neighborhoods all sound like Fallujah right now. But it was a great weekend for Met fans. Not so great for Yankee fans. I think they should make this a 4th of July tradition in New York. Have the Yankees and Mets play, either at Citi Field or at Yankee Stadium. But the usual crew tonight, Matt Mankiewich here, Ken Fermin and Zach Wilson. Mike Anderson will be joining us a little bit later. And also, coming up at 11 p.m., Pat Pickens. He just wrote a new book on the old Hartford Whalers, now known as the Carolina Hurricanes. But there was a sort of a fourth local team in the NHL, in the area, so to speak. It's actually like between two markets. It was one of the reasons why they're no longer there. But we'll get into that in the second hour. But right now, we are now wondering whether or not the Yankees can find a sucker to take Aroldis Chapman. Guys, anybody, any takers?
Well, looks like now he has started to become serious trade bait. He is really, here in this first half of the season, he has really put up, really reinvigorated the definition of Jekyll and Hyde. The first half of this first half, Jekyll, and the second half of this first half of the season, it's all Hyde. I mean, really.
Well, yes, we want to run and hide.
It seems like Chapman can't even get through like one out at the very least without trying to give up a run of any kind.
Line on Chapman tonight, earlier today, in the day game that we made the day-night doubleheader. And yes, I hate 7-inning games possible. 0 innings, 3 batters, 1 hit, 3 runs, all earned. No strikeouts, no nothing else. Boom, again. And compounded by the fact that he did again earlier in the week against the Angels. And let's be honest, one Angel game got banged because of the inclement weather. And we got the same kind of lousy weather over the weekend as we got during Memorial Day. Starting to become a pattern. But the pattern with Aroldis Chapman is, over the past couple of months, as Zach just mentioned, he can't get anything over. But the other thing, too, and I had this discussion, guys, with some people, of course, some reporters covering the game in the press room between games. And we all know what Aroldis Chapman's most effective pitch is, the four-seam fastball.
Yes, it's a fastball that pretty much can go as fast as his career high of 106 miles per hour unofficially.
Yes.
I remember that when he was with Cincinnati.
What's he become infatuated with as of late? The slider. And the slider seems to hang a lot. And he gets hung out to dry as a result. This is now, of course, this is a situation. There are two situations here. And Aaron Boone got a lot of heat in both cases. You heard the crowd yell, "Fire Boone." And in the first one against the Angels, walks the bases loaded. First of all, given his struggles, why are you letting him walk the bases loaded? The first 2 walks, you get him out of there. I mean, it can still happen. They can still blow it, but you're up 4 runs. You have a little bit of margin for error. Okay? So he walks the bases loaded in grand salami time. Does the same thing. Blows a lead. 2 winnable games. So what do you end up with? You drop 2 out of 3 to the Angels, and you drop 2 out of 3 to the Mets, instead of winning both series and having people breathe a little easier. They are back to 1 game above 500. Could you imagine what the reaction would have been like if they came out tonight 1 game below?
Well, honestly, it would have been off of Boone's head. If anything, that Game 2 victory, there's really one big winner there, and I believe it there. Because, frankly, I think after the week the Yankees have had, if they lose both series and get swept against the Mets, I really don't know how you could argue keeping it, man. No disrespect to Aaron. I thought early on the season, a lot of the hate that was slung his way was a bit uncalled for because the Yankees got off to a slow start. But it is evident that this team is struggling. And honestly, dead to rights in terms of even thinking about sniffing the postseason right now, despite being a game over 500. Honestly, his post-game interviews have been apathetic, to say the least. I mean, the lack of accountability, not only him, but Brian Cashman hold on themselves and throw onto their players, onto their team, where it got so bad, Aaron Judge had to call for a team-only meeting to try to boost morale. Worked well against the Angels in that final game, but haven't seen much success since. I mean, it's honestly just unbelievable to think that this team was projected to win as many as 95 games, almost 100 games at the start of the season. You know,
they still can, believe it or not. That's the other crazy thing.
All we gotta do is make some sort of run. All they gotta do is do 50 and 30 in their last 80, and they're
that's a lot easier said than done.
Wins.
And honestly, with this roster, no way that's getting done. As you alluded to earlier,
actually, I think they can.
Gotta go. No way.
Look what the Mets are doing with no hitting. People have been. I was listening. I had to leave the game early in order to get here and do the show. So I was listening to the ESPN broadcast with A-Rod as I was leaving the building. And they were talking about this Met team, and we'll get into it in greater detail, I think, being like the 73 team, which finished 3 games over 500, but took the Oakland Athletics to 7 games in the World Series. But they had sensational pitching, couldn't hit their weight. Well, only decent hitter on the team was Rusty Staub. But that they got by mostly on pitching in the postseason, that's what you need. So if the Mets do put themselves in good position for the postseason, they're set up for a good run, kind of like the Islanders did this past year.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, we had more faith, I think, in the Mets entering the season than the Islanders, at least in the grand scheme of things. I know in Long Island, everyone penned the Isles, making it to the Final Four. But I think the difference is, though, you're missing is for the Mets, they're definitely overachieving in the sense of they've been without so many guys, yet they've still found ways to win. And a big part of that, as you said, has been pitching, right? The trio of Jacob deGrom, Marcus Stroman, Taijuan Walker have been key facets for that. But even the hitting, as we saw against the Yankees in particular, it can wake up and produce enormously. 8 runs yesterday, 10 runs in the first game today. That's 18 runs in about 14, 15 innings. I mean, those guys, they can find ways to get hot and produce that. For the Yankees, for me, it's really tough to believe in the Yankees even when they can produce 7 to 8 runs. As we saw against the Angels, they still find ways to give up 10 or 11 runs.
Yeah, by putting your oldest Chapman out there.
It's not just Chapman, though. There's a whole slew of secondary starters and relievers, really anyone not named Garrett Cole, where it's like, it's tough to watch. I thought Michael King did a good job.
Garrett Cole.
Green today did a good job. But, I mean,
Garrett
outside
Cole
of him, who do you really see staying on this team?
Well, Garrett Cole has hit slump of the last couple of starts have not been good.
That's true.
But I'll say this again.
Friggin' Spire attack, I tell you.
The Magic 5. Score 5 runs, you bail him out. Score 5 runs consistently, you will win more often than not, even with this pitching staff. Now, the thing that I've been saying over the past few weeks that bothers me the most, and by contrast, if you want to use the Islanders as an example, the thing that impressed me the most with Barry Trotz's coaching is that he took the same personnel that had the worst defense in the NHL and turned it into the best. These guys, were one of the best offensive teams in Major League Baseball, and now they're among the worst with the same guys.
Yeah,
What's
Yankees
going on here?
second to
Did
last
everybody
in
get
the
old at
American-
once?
The Yankees second to last in the American League in terms of runs per game, at a little bit over 4, well below the league average of almost 5.
And well below the 5 they need to be successful.
Yeah, again, there's a multitude of issues, but again, part of it is really there's blame everywhere. Coaching, the front office, the way this team was designed to be a power hitting team, and they struggled for that for many of the games this season to even get 5 runs on the board. Forget, getting scores like 8 or things like that, or hitting double digits. This team barely, the win today, they got 4. They were fortunate that the Mets were tired out of after having 9 and 7, so 16 innings plus, and being in the midst of it was essentially a 14-inning game. And even with the first 7 innings, the best they could do was split. I mean, this Yankees team, outside of Aaron Judge, it's tough to see who even is a good hitter.
But they've been getting a little bit better in the past few weeks.
Not this week.
The starting pitching, I think, has tapered off a little bit.
Tim Castro.
What was that?
Yeah, the starting pitching is tapered off a little bit. The starting pitching is the main reason they're 500 now instead of significantly below. Look at the team. I mean, if you want to break out the standings, look at teams like the Atlanta Braves, who are in second place behind the Mets, 2 games below. The Mets are only 6 over. Well, actually 5 over because this doesn't count the game they just lost. And the Braves apparently are playing live right now, too. The Nationals are 2 under. Philly is 3 under. That's in the Mets division alone. A bunch of teams are hovering around the 500 mark that you expect better from. Now, out west, you've got the best team in baseball, the Giants, and next best, the Dodgers. And they're only percentage points apart. But San Diego is also, they're 14 over. But the rest of the league, no one else is more than 7 over. Milwaukee's in first place in the Central. No, correction, they're 17 over. Correction. Okay, I was looking at 51-44 and 51-34. But everybody else, I mean, NL East is a grab bag right now.
Yeah,
Now,
they proved that. The Atlanta and Washington by beating the Mets pretty good over the past week. You're right, it's still close there. But again, if you're going to try to credit to the AL East, the Yankees are double digit back. And it's going to take more than just getting hot. You got to be consistently hot. And frankly, you haven't seen that from much of the league outside of the aforementioned Giants, Brewers, Cubs.
The schedule favors them, though. Well, first of all, you don't have to win the division. You just get in a wild card and win 1 game, which they do have a pitcher that ostensibly is capable of doing that for them. Didn't do it today, but that's another issue. But the important thing here is that the Yankees have to get into position, and they're not in position right now. Doesn't take much. That's the thing. 10 back behind the Red Sox. Red Sox run away with the division, so be it. I don't think they will. I do believe that the flaws everybody thought they had will come back to haunt them, and that race will tighten up. But Tampa Bay's in there, and Toronto's in there. Now, the Yankees' schedule, just July alone, does favor them getting back in if they make use of what's in front of them. That, of course, is a big if. So your big if right now is they go to Seattle. They're only 4 games over 500. Then they go to the Astros. Then they get the All-Star break. But 4 games at home against the Red Sox. 4 games at home against the Red Sox. First weekend after the break. And then the following weekend, 4 in Fenway. You got 8 games in the month of July, with which you can make up ground on the Red Sox. And if number 1, either Aroldis Chapman cleans up his act or gets replaced. Unfortunately, Zach Britton would be the most likely replacement, but he's not available yet.
Well, Chad Green did a fine job today.
Chad Green was great. Chad Green saved their bacon today. Chad Green's got to be a legit candidate now.
The 7th inning that he had.
But you can't.
It was really.
This is the thing. Managers will tell you, I believe in my closer. Well, he sunk you twice in the same week, and not just, cheap hits and stuff or errors. He killed you twice.
Murder.
And he killed you. He killed you against the Angels. He walked the bases low and gave up a grand slam. He didn't get a single out today. He killed you. And he's killed you. He is figured into your elimination in the postseason 2 years in a row. That's one of the reasons why I'm anti-Chapman. I don't think Chapman got his ring with the Cubs, and he's been okay in the regular season. And we were comparing him to Armando Benitez. Remember him?
Oh, gosh. Try to forget him.
Oh, yeah. But look at Tale of Two Cities. Uris Familia. He's no longer the closer. He had a good outing in the first game.
Yeah, he's coming off the IL as well.
Yeah. So what do you do? There are two things you do. Well, first of all, you have to accept the fact that you're going to have to pull back Chapman, and you're going to have to put somebody in to close, at least for now, because you cannot afford to let that happen again. You got to put him in low-pressure situations. 4-run lead, it was a non-save situation. Should have been no pressure. Killed him.
It was interesting seeing him walking around in that 5th inning of Game 2 today, looking like he really wanted to warm up and get ready. If I'm him, I want him touching the ball for the next week at least. I mean, his last 7 games alone, despite having 4 saves, he has a 16.8 ERA in 7 games, a win and a loss. And in 5 innings pitched, he's given up 10 earned runs as well as 9 walks. Just today alone, he gave up a home run to Pete Alonso, despite being up 0-2 on it. And then hit the next batter, and then walked the next batter before he was thankfully pulled out. But the damage had been done by that point.
Yeah, remember, he gave up 3 runs without getting an out. So that counts as 0 innings against his ERA, which automatically makes it skyrocket.
Even so, he does not look good. And really, it's matched up with the rules set in place by MLB regarding spider tack. Since they've taken that away, and I'm not accusing Chapman of using it, but in all likelihood, without that, he has fallen well below the standard of just an average MLB reliever. I mean,
like I said,
if you're the Yankees, now is really the time to shop him. I don't know who's going to want him after seeing his performance, but if there's some low-level team that's really struggling out there, like the Pirates, or some team that has a high cap space that wants to take a risk, you got to get whatever you can get with him and get rid of him now, because this is a guy who I really think it's just going to hurt them from here on out. It's going to take a lot to rebuild. He's not going to be the Cubs of Ronald Chapman, but it's going to be a lot to rebuild him to the state he was before.
All you got to do, if my friend is correct, the one way you can turn his season around is to make him throw his slider less often and not rely on it as much. The 4-seam fastball is his out pitch, and basically, if he throws a slider in a payoff count or in a hitter's count, if he throws a slider, you fine him.
Even then, though, you're relying on a fastball that's lost about 3 miles per hour. Again, since the ruling's been in place.
From 103 to 101.
Well, even today, I don't think he hit 100. Unless I recall differently.
I don't think he's
really... I think they need a lot of moves. They really need a lot of moves. And
he's still got the fastball, but he hangs sliders.
Well, the other issue, and Zach, you touched on this, is when you only got the fastball, everyone kind of knows what you're throwing. So it's a matter of guessing where you're throwing it as opposed to guessing
try
what
hitting
you're going to throw.
If it's a good four-seamer,
prove that.
you know it's coming. Look, remember Mariano Rivera on the cutter? Everybody knew he was throwing the cutter. They still couldn't hit it.
Would you seriously watch the Yankees back then to understand his game?
Yeah, and there's a big difference, though, that, again, just that cutter was untouchable. It's like a DeGrom slider. It's untouchable. But, Chapman's fastball is not the DeGrom slider or the Rivera cutter. People have touched it, and it's going to keep getting touched at the rate he's going now. And the Yankees really need to make some moves. And you brought up the AL East a rivalry, and they're going to be facing them soon. They've gone 17-24 against AL East rivals so far this season. They only average
that sweep against the Red Sox figured into that.
Yeah, but take it out, again, it's still 17-21, giving up 5
golden opportunities to turn it around, because not only do they have the Red Sox on successive weekends, they've got the Rays sandwiched in between in the month of July alone. They had 2 at home against the Phillies. They've got a couple against the Marlins, and they start August with a weekend series against the Marlins, and July start August in Miami. But it's mostly coming out of the break. It's East. 2 National League East games, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 American League East games. So you have an opportunity there. Is this the wake-up call? We're wondering. We thought maybe the Angel game was the wake-up call. Nope. But on the other hand, the fire Boone chance, even though supposedly Boone isn't to blame for this, if you know a guy is struggling, you put 2 guys on, hook them. Don't let him put the 3rd guy on. And if he doesn't like it, well, I don't want to mess with his head. He's already a mess. And look, they don't pay me millions of dollars a year to manage the New York Yankees. And Aaron Boone, up to this point, he does have his first 2 seasons with 100-plus wins. And he has credentials, et cetera, et cetera. But damn, I can't be the only one saying, why do you let a guy who's been struggling the way he's been struggling walk the bases loaded? Ugh. So, there is a flip side to this. As we said, tale of 2 cities. Familia versus Chapman, for example. The 2 pitching lines. Just take a look at them on MLB.com if you like. And if you're too lazy to do so, I'll break it out for you. Okay, so here we go. Let me get back to the first game on the Yankee website. Let me get to real MLB, to the homepage, as we used to call it. Still do. They still do. I don't work there anymore. Here we go. 10-5 Met win from earlier today. The box score. And the tale of 2 cities, as we were talking about with pitchers. Okay, Familia, who was credited with the win. 1 inning, 1 hit, no runs, no hit, nothing earned, no walks, 2 Ks. Solid. Lugo, 1 inning, 1 strikeout, 0s the rest of the way. And then Chapman, we'll do it again. No innings, 3 batters, 1 hit, 3 runs, all earned, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, 1 home run. And Lukey, by the way, who took over for Chapman the other night too, wasn't a hell of a lot better. Ella's and Lukey. But you know what else? Chad Green pitched the first game too, and he third of an inning, nothing across. Loizaga wasn't bad either. Okay, yep. Cole got knocked around a little bit, but the Yankees bailed him out.
Which is not what you want to be seeing here, Cole.
But
That's
you know what?
very bad.
It will happen every now and then. Obviously, you want your race to be. You want to be able to pencil in a win when your race is going. You can't always. But that was an important win.
Of course not.
That the Yankees just pulled out.
Yeah, I mean, getting swept in the Mets is really not what they want at all. I mean, especially, I mean, you know that the Mets do look better right now as far as the record is concerned. But as you step up, I mean, like, there's been saying that the Yankees usually had a better track record against the Mets in most recent years, even when.
Right. The Mets were considered, and if the Yankees were struggling leading into a series with the Mets, Yankee fans would be confident that they get their act together against the Mets. They'll take 2 out of 3, and everything will be right with the world. And you want to know something?
Not anymore.
If not for Chapman today, they would have taken 2 out of 3.
So you think
it would have been close. But for the Mets, again, for the Mets coming in this week, and Zach, you were at the game, I believe, yesterday, so you attest to this. They got a lot of their injured players back. We mentioned Familia, but on the offensive side, Brandon Nimmo came back, and I thought he had a really big impact this weekend. You know, and the 10-5 win, he came up with a couple hits and led the team with 3 RBIs. And, you know, since coming back from the IL, he's batted about 400. And coming in as the leadoff guy, I thought has really also helped Francisco Lindor, who was struggling a bit, because it made him have to deal with less pressure being the leadoff guy, and you stick him right behind Nimmo. And as we saw in that game 1, they were able to bat around the Yankees because they were able to string 3, 4, 5 hits together, which ultimately led with the 2-run RBI single to make it a 10-5 game.
Yeah, I saw that game yesterday between Walker and Montgomery, and really, until like the 6th inning, it would seem, Taijuan Walker was really getting hot. And he really brought down those pitches that the Yankees could not really hit into the field at all.
Yeah, it took a no-hitter to the 6th inning.
Yeah, I mean, I was starting to think, whoa, this has actually happened, especially at Yankee Stadium, because I knew that the Yankees were having some trouble most recently with their hits, and then of course you see Aaron Judge doing what he does best, going where he usually goes, just short of the judge's chambers. And where I was today is different from where I've been in the past. Like, usually they're the bleachers, and I believe the bleachers are the most fun parts, like the most exciting seats in Yankee Stadium, in my personal opinion, because me and my girlfriend,
a lot of bleacher creatures out there.
Few years, it's just we really get the excitement, the ejections from fans, and it probably also brings up the fan interference call today in Game 1 that also led to the Mets win in that regard.
And that was pretty dumb on that guy's part. And a Mets fan too, robbing what could have been a triple from, I believe it was Peraza. But in any case,
I would not see that as a triple. Probably just a bases clearing double.
Well, I say it robbed him of a run until the next batter drove him home. But regardless, you know, that's the other thing too. This was the first time, and it was great to see virtually a full house at Yankee Stadium. The 2 biggest crowds since the pandemic shut everything down in New York, 40 and 42,000 respectively between yesterday and today. And again, for the Mets, they showed up for the most part, and their offense thrived in what was a pretty hostile environment. Considering they've been in a hostile crowd with that many people going back a couple seasons ago against Philadelphia. And again, that 4th and 5th inning in yesterday's game where they strung together 8 runs, I thought really showcased that this team is going to be a lot better offensively, especially centering in, having Brandon Nimmo back. Lindor is bumped down, so he's going to get pitched to a bit more than he has been in the past. Other players stepping up as well. Pete Alonso, of course, having home runs today in both games. Just seeing that lineup, I think this is a team that so far they're the 3rd worst offense in the league, but I believe in them more than I do the Yankees in terms of their offense, number one. And I think they're going to get a wake-up call by getting all these healthy guys back.
Yeah.
They will hit better.
Yeah, offense is always the key. we know that the Yankees haven't really looked that type of offensive team that they were supposed to be this season, despite all the pieces that they appear to have that makes them look like stars. But it's been a really big struggle trying to utilize them the way they have last year. I mean, like, so far, one of the big pieces that has shown a significant improvement this season as compared to last is Gary Sanchez, and he's been getting some real good hits and home runs. Getting back to his Kraken status, you may as well say. I mean, he could be a candidate if there was a most improved player section for the MLB this season. He could be part of that category. And who knows if there would be any other Mets, too. I mean, you know that the Mets are really close to being healthy because there's just one guy left, apparently, from their opening day roster that still needs to complete the rehab assignment and pretty close, J.D. Davis. So
yeah, that's right.
once he's healthy, everybody will be healthy, and we'll see what it's like. Well, of course, not everybody healthy. I mean, we talked about the opening day
In terms
roster,
of hitters, right.
I mean, David Pearson, that's going to be a long road for him with that oblique strain. But despite that, you're still hoping that the day will soon come when Carlos Carrasco and Noah Syndergaard will eventually make their first start of the season, which won't happen until later this summer, of course.
Well, yes. That's what you're hoping for as a Met fan. That the guys have done a pretty good job holding the fort up until now. First half of the season, I mean, look, the New York Post is famous for putting out its midseason report cards for all the teams. I'd like to see what they're going to look like for both these teams. I mean, DeGrom, obviously, A+. A++.
Being part of that, being into the All-Star team, 100% not surprised.
Speaking of which, though, this is where the reality kicks in for the New York Mets. He's the only All-Star. Now, there's been talk that he will step aside for another player on the Mets because it doesn't jibe with his place in the rotation. So he doesn't necessarily want to pitch, which is fine because you don't want to lose him in the All-Star game and ruin your season. So that could be somebody else on the team. Who, I don't know. Who would be the alternate for Jacob DeGrom?
I think the good alternate would be Taijuan Walker, especially over his past several starts. He's looked real good. You know, I thought it would have been interesting too to see Marcus Stroman, but he's been struggling concurrently as well with Garrett Cole, surprisingly enough. But I think Taijuan Walker. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm alluding to.
It does seem
and he was filled out
to see what's going on with Stroman after no.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely is. It is conflicting too. Yeah, absolutely, Zach. But for Taijuan Walker, though, he's been consistent for the most part. 7-3 on the season, 2.44 ERA in his 15 starts, and he had 85 innings pitched. But even despite that, he's been able to muster up 87 strikeouts and only give up 6 home runs. So to have an ERA plus of 157 is pretty good and above the league standard for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I really like what Walker did. I really like seeing what he did on Saturday. Yesterday, you know that he's definitely one of those top pitchers for the Mets besides Jacob DeGrom, who is pretty much the top in the entire MLB. I mean, you know that he had that struggle in the first inning against Atlanta on Thursday, but after that struggle, just went back to his peak physical form. 14 strikeouts. And keeping his ERA below 1 for the time being this season. I mean, that's still the lowest in the major leagues, in the majors right now this season.
Call me biased, but really, there hasn't been, or actually, it's arguable. Well, it's between him and Shohei Ohtani, though, for the two most impressive stories of the season. But focusing on DeGrom for a moment, just to see him shine throughout the entire season. Going in, we all know he would be good. But I think he even exceeded expectations by still managing to keep his ERA below 1. I mean, the pace he's going at, it's likely he'll set the record for the lowest ERA in MLB history. getting it below, keeping it below a 1, which again is something I don't think anyone in the world would have predicted happening, especially in this era where balls are juiced and then they're not, and there's so many things that favor the batters. It's incredible.
But here's the problem: when Bob Gibson had his 1.12 ERA, which by the way is not the record, some guy named Hub Leonard back in the dead ball era, got as low as 1.01. But that was the dead ball era. Dead ball era, if your ERA was 3, you were in trouble. But in 1968, which that 1 year was a revival of the dead ball era, he had 1.12, lost 9 games. So how about not getting run support for a pennant winner?
The
Cardinals finished first that year, lost in 7 games to the Tigers, and won the World Series against the Red Sox the previous year. So, and won 64 as well with Gibson. Gibson was the reason they beat the Yankees. So, lost 9 games, but I've said this before again on the show. The amazing thing about Gibson is that he was never pulled from the mound the entire year, only for a pinch hitter. He completed most of his games, didn't complete all of them, but he was pulled for a pinch hitter in those situations, never from the mound. How do you like that?
It's unbelievable. It's literally straight out of a video game. To be that strong, and not only that, but consistent throughout the entire 9 innings. No one can do that now.
Yeah, he went 22-9. He would go all the way and lose, like 1-0. But some crazy thing like that. But that was with a pennant winner. He was on a good team. He's one of the reasons they were good, obviously. But that's how bad offense was that year.
Yeah, it is. It is going to be interesting for these two New York teams for sure, and it's going to be fun. For the All-Star.
We haven't talked about the Yankees All-Star roster because guess who's on it?
Exactly the pitchers we talked about that are having their problems. I mean,
exactly.
Really, they're judging their performances based on the first half of the season. Really, so basically, you can see the first quarter of this season before it all went south for them. I mean, they think that the ends just like the good they do has far outweighed their most recent bad. I mean, I guess the other question is at that point, because of that, I mean, is there anybody else who is technically better than them overall this season so far in that regard? That is another question, probably why Cole and Chapman are where they are right now.
To me, Aroldis Chapman All-Star is the equivalent of Pro Bowl Evan Ingram. I mean, I feel like you get those guys based on name value and in terms of what team they play for. No respect to Garrett Cole, because he's had a good front of the season up until recently. But even for Aroldis Chapman, he did well in his first 18 appearances. Sure, he had 0 ERA, but there's been enough time where you've seen he's really fallen off and bad, terribly. And just on the Yankees roster alone, there have been 2 pitchers, first time in franchise history, they've thrown an immaculate inning in the same season, and it's not those guys, all right? Chad Green and Michael King are the 2 to do it. I'd have those 2 ahead of on my sheet well before Aroldis Chapman, and that's for an All-Star game where relievers don't even get that much consideration. You're not a closer.
Well, here's where it gets crazy. Garrett Cole, as you mentioned, is on the All-Star team, and he earned it, no doubt about it. First couple of months, Chapman earned it. Lately, he's been terrible. But there's one other Yankee on. Where's the other Yankee? Judge, right?
Yeah, Aaron Judge, too. I mean,
Judge. But Judge is legit. Judge is one hitter that has been solid for the Yankees. His average has been around 290 or so. He's got the home runs. He's got the RBIs. He's legit. And he also was voted in. So he's starting in the All-Star game. So, but Ohtani, we have to talk about Ohtani. This is unprecedented. Everybody talks about Babe Ruth doubling as a pitcher and an outfielder and hitting 29 home runs, which was then a record, more than most teams in 1919 as a pitcher. But I will challenge people again. Open up Baseball Reference and take a look at that 1919 season for Babe Ruth. And then take a look at 1917. Reason why? 1917 it was his last year as a full-time pitcher. And take a look, number one, the record, and then number two, the innings pitched. Because here we go. 1917, also age 22. 24-13. Okay. 35 complete games, 38 starts. That's sick. And that led the majors that year. Okay, so we're talking about a first-line top pitcher. So, 326 innings, which was not so unusual for the day. Okay. 1918, 13-7, 166 innings, half, and 19 starts, 18 complete games. Still pretty good, although nowhere near what he was doing in 1917 as a full-time pitcher. 1919, the year he hits 29 home runs. 9-5, 133 innings, 15 starts, 12 complete games. So you see the evolution over the course of time. By 1919, he wasn't a regular in the rotation. He was getting starts, but half as many as a typical starter in the rotation. So Ohtani, on the flip side of things, let's open up Ohtani's record so far. Okay. Ohtani right now, okay, we're just looking at his pitching right now. Okay, so he's got 12 starts in already. Now, that's pretty solid. Now, the big question is, how many more starts are they going to run him out there? Especially as his home run totals climb. He's got 30 home runs and a 3-1 record, 3.60 ERA in 12 starts. You know what it reminds me of? The young quarterbacks who pile up rushing yards. Run down the list of them. Within 5 years, the rushing yards go down. They're standing up in the pocket like everybody else.
Well, I know there's many Russian quarterbacks.
Yeah, but how many of them stay that way throughout their career?
It does seem to vary because we know there's a lot of quarterbacks that can really has great speed to get those types of rushing yards. We've seen in the past.
Yeah, but take a look. Take a look as they get older and as they get beat up in order to extend their careers. Look, running backs don't have long careers to begin with. So quarterbacks, at least they have the arm to fall back on. That's what usually ends up happening. They can't stay mobile forever. It's too much of a strain on the body. So Here we go. It's an experiment because it hasn't been tried in over 100 years. But even 100 years ago, the Red Sox knew better than to try to subject Babe Ruth, who was 22 years old, 23, 24, okay, young enough to do it. They didn't even try to put him in the rotation regularly and have him play the outfield when he wasn't pitching.
And again, just on that argument, I believe this is going to Ohtani's obviously not going to be doing both forever, but I think it will last at least 4 or 5 years because A, he's young, B, he's not in that contact sport like football, so you're going to get less wear and tear on your body anywhere that's like arm and shoulder, obviously. And really, as long as he keeps dueling as being that dual player as a DH solely and a pitcher, he's not necessarily putting too much strain on his body when he's not in the batter's box. So you got a lot of rest, and you pitch once a week. You have a rest day after that, that. And then you're batting 3-4 times a day for 4 days straight, rather. And you're able to control it is how you train, number one, and number two, keep yourself healthy enough to where you can produce like Shohei Ohtani. It's absolutely remarkable because it has been tried in the past, especially over the past few seasons. The Angels alone did it with Jared Walsh. Ultimately, they opted against using him as both a reliever and fielder and just stuck him at first base. And he's been striving as well, as you alluded to, Matt, in terms of how good of a hitter and a pitcher someone could be. But for Ohtani, it's incredible to see him hitting 278, as I said, leading 31 home runs. There's no way he can go back to solely being a pitcher in my eyes. His 3.6 ERA stands out, but even then, he still has 83 strikeouts over 60 innings. I mean, it is incredible how just the amount of talent this one guy is producing on both ends of the field.
Now, when I played Little League, and if you guys played Little League, you probably were exposed to the same thing. All the pitchers played position when they weren't pitching.
Right. I was an example of that. As a reliever, I would play either second or right field after pitching.
Right. Because you're also limited to a certain number of innings per week, depending on how many games you played.
Yeah, that would be about 3 or 4. Yeah,
so sometimes, especially if the coach knew he was going to be shorthanded, he'd have one guy throw 3 and another guy throw 3.
Right,
And there were 6-inning games, 60-foot diamond. But that was Little League. How many games you're playing a year? Nowhere near as many. So in college, same thing. You have a lot of guys. Well, we like to cite our favorite baseball player at Stony Brook, Joe Nathan, as the epitome of a position player who pitched, even though he made one pitching appearance that he says in his college career. Matt Sank always knew he could pitch, but he was too good an athlete. They had to have him in the lineup every day, so he didn't pitch him. They got to the NCAA with him at shortstop. So he goes into the minors, and again, this story we told all over again, that the San Francisco Giants, the team that drafted him, basically said, you can get to the majors if you pitch, but not if you are play shortstop. Now, of course, he's in the National League, so he would get the chance to bat. And he also came up as a starter, by the way, too. The Twins converted him into a reliever. So he got converted from shortstop to starting pitcher to closer over the course of his career. But also tells what kind of versatile athlete he was.
Oh, yes.
Great.
And for Ohtani, this isn't new. It's something he's been doing in Japan since about 2015, 2016. And ultimately up until right before he left, is when he went as an outfielder full time, just because of how good of a hitter he was. But I think with just how off the rails he's been, number one, and number two, how talented he is, and all, not only the press, but the positive press this is growing. I really do see this as kickstarting a trend in the near future. I think within the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to have every team try out at least one player who could do both pitching and batting, just because it saves a player. You essentially have a 27th guy doing two positions, and you're able to store an extra guy to contribute as well. Will it work to the extent of Ohtani? I don't know. Probably not, considering the anomaly Shohei has been, especially this season alone. But the results are there. They've proven that it can be done. As having a player with this amount of talent to get it done, batting and pitching. Now the question is going to be, how do you implement it further, especially in the game where there is so much wear and tear throughout a season, and especially one in a shortened season like we saw last year. Hopefully we don't deal with that again. But having to quickly adjust from having no games to going 162, what kind of impact that has on.
Here's the next crazy question, and it just basically piggybacks off what you just said. What if he gets hurt pitching?
Well, the thing is, he's already been hurt before.
I mean,
yeah, you remember before.
Isn't that what caused his Tommy John surgery a few years ago? Isn't that why he had that situation again?
Remember, he first came in. He was not this good. He had a 6.7 ERA, which is double what he's got now, and then had an arm injury, which resulted in him needing Tommy John. And this has been the first time, because he didn't pitch much last year, if any at all, that he's been used as a pitcher for a full season, well, so far for the half the season, and it has worked out well. But you're absolutely right. I think the next major injury is probably going to end this quote-unquote experiment. So that's why I think what the Angels manager is doing right now with Joe Madden is great, because again, yes, he is playing 5 times a week, essentially 6 times a week, but he's not playing in the outfield. He's not playing, doing batting, pitching, and fielding. You're using him solely as a pitcher. He has one rest day circled in every week on top of the rest day the team has in between games and travel. And then he has 4 games or 5 games where he's just solely batting.
And you know what the Babe Ruth crowd is going to say? Well, Babe Ruth didn't have a DH. He had to play the outfield whenever he didn't pitch. But
next year, probably
they made the adjustment. He just didn't pitch as much.
Right. And again, next year probably won't be much of a choice when the DH comes in. But I'm enjoying what I've seen Phil Parker and Shohei Ohtani. I said at the start of the season, if he produces what he's doing now, he'll be MVP. And he has well exceeded those expectations in my eyes. I thought he was going to get 30 for the entire season. He's gotten 30 in the first half alone. I mean, it is. We talk about video game. That is a video game character right there, Zach. It is crazy.
Okay,
it's just really
now we expand our scope a little bit. Mike Trout is injured. Mike Trout will come back. We take a look at where these Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim are in the standings. And they're in trouble because they're in the American League West. And they're 9 games. They're in the same spot as the Yankees. 9 out of first. Houston's up top. Oakland's right behind them. Seattle. They've got a problem. Because they've got, with Trout in the lineup, they've got Kevin Durant. They've got Kyrie Irving. They got James Harden. They got 2 out of 3 anyway. But 2 of the best offensive players in the game. And there they are. 1 game over 500. 9 out of first place. And nobody thinks they can catch Houston or Oakland. Even with Trout and Ohtani in the lineup. or Ohtani in the rotation doing both.
I was going to say, keep it baseball. It's like having Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and still missing out.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Remember that going back to those runs per game again, in those days, they also had, they didn't call the lineup Murderer's Row for nothing. Yes, Ruth and Gary counted for more than half the home runs they hit, but they had 300 hitters up and down. Bob Musial was the left fielder, right? His lifetime batting average was like 309 and not the Hall of Fame because he played in a hitting-heavy era and had Ruth and Gehrig in the outfield Gehrig the outfield, Gehrig at first base. And Earl Combs, I believe, is a Hall of Famer in center. So, but Murderers Row, again, look at those numbers. 1927. Okay, not just the home runs, the RBIs. And the runs per game and the whole thing. They were invincible. So, when you name pitchers, Herb Pennock and George Pipgras, Pennock, I believe, is in. Nobody else from the pitching staff is in the Hall of Fame. So, they were able to do it with that. Ironically enough, the teams of the 50s with Mickey Mantle were not as strong offensively as that team was. They had better pitching.
Yeah, and to me, I think the Yankees and Angels are great parallels because I think they both have the same issue, where they could have good pitching as we saw with Ohtani winner as well, Healy there as well. But outside of the top two starters in the rotation, no one is really producing. And likewise for Los Angeles and batting wise, outside of Trout, who's been hurt, Jared Walsh, who's really stepped up as a hitter, cleanup guy, Anthony Rendon as well, and Ohtani. No one there is really making much noise on the offensive front. Again, going up against lineups.
Carried the Nationals to a world championship.
Carried it strong, but he played a huge factor offensively for sure. Yeah. And again, going up against teams, as you said, the Oakland A's, where you can list all 5 or 6 guys in that offense, or the Astros, who you can list all 5 or 6 guys in their offense. You're not going to win only relying on Rendon, Ohtani, and Walsh to give you 3 runs a game. You got to produce more than that. And it's shocking because even falling behind the Mariners, who are 5 games over 500. And the Mariners really didn't have too many high expectations entering the season, but they've managed to stack up several series wins and behind a great lefty as well, and Yusei Kikuchi, who's also going to be in the All-Star team. And he has also been fun to watch.
There's a lot of parity going on right now. In Major League Baseball, yes, you do have your good teams, but you have a second tier right now that all of them are hovering around the 500 mark, and any of them could break out. And you wonder how many of those top teams are really a house of cards. Houston's going to be there. Oakland's going to be there. What are the White Sox going to do? Okay. Those wild cards are going to be very hotly contested down the stretch, especially if the top teams pull away. I don't think they will. The NL Central is going to be a free-for-all the whole year, I think.
Oh, as it has proven, with the Cubs going 1-9 in their last 10, and the Brewers going 9-1 in their last 10. I mean, 2 weeks ago,
a 7-game lead.
I thought for sure the Cubs would have pulled away, but it's Brewers who've won the race to 50 wins in that division. Yeah, that, as you said, that's going to be a free for all. And likewise, the NL West, which has 3 teams with 50 wins already, with Padres, Dodgers, Giants. And the Dodgers, who have really gotten hot right before the All-Star break, going 9-1 in their last 10.
But going back to those Angels, their Achilles heel is their pitching. Yeah, Ohtani, penciling a win, looking good. But they have given up. And again, looking at the runs against column, second most in the American League. Worst is Minnesota, and Minnesota is 14 games under 500. That's your problem. And that's been a complaint among Angels fans. It's frustrating when you essentially have the 2021 equivalent of Ruth and Gehrig in your lineup, or Aaron and Matthews, or run down your list of 1-2 punches in history. You have the 2 best offensive players in baseball, and you're 500. and your
Under
pitching
500.
lets you down all the time.
Sorry, just one game below 500, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, this is a team that ranks among the best offenses in the MLB. And, you're right, just pitching-wise, it is, they really, again, like Yankees only got one or two players that are really making much of a difference. A 5.0 ERA, that puts you among the worst teams like Diamondbacks and the Orioles who can't buy a win. That's not playoff baseball right there. And Ohtani and Trout are really two guys whose primes you do not want to waste in the grand scheme of things.
Correction, third worst in terms of runs allowed. Tops is Baltimore, and they're 30 games under 500.
Oh, what a mess.
And they're the worst team in baseball.
Two worst teams in baseball, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, Arizona's the worst. Baltimore's second worst. They're worse in the American League. But
with those teams, you're pretty much not surprised with that. Baltimore, they're never good.
Yeah, we know they're not contesting the team.
The only bright side they have right now is Cedric Mullins, who's looking good, and despite his rankings, not a starter in the All-Star game. And a lot of people
shame. Yeah, but I'll say before we switch, shame on you all for not voting him in the All-Star game. That man is the one shining star on this Baltimore team.
Okay.
I mean,
top of the hour, WUSB Stony Brook. Pat Pickens is with us right now. And, Pat, you just came out with a book. And tell us a little bit about this wonderful team that was caught between two markets that eventually won a Stanley Cup in another city and kind of got overshadowed because they were like right smack in between two of the largest markets in the country, the Hartford Whalers. Tell us more about your book.
Well, it's an exciting project. I'll say that, first off, happy to be here with you guys, to talk about this. It's pretty exciting. It's coming up. First off, I should forgive me for, if you hear fireworks going off in the background, it's obviously the 4th, but,
same problem we have.
Yeah. No, I think it's a fascinating project. I think it's a fascinating team. And I think that's sort of what happened in terms of the story to begin with. It's like you said, it's this sort of team that continues to exist, that refuses to die, that has not been around for, it'll be 25 years next year. And I worked in Connecticut for a long time. I was the sports editor of a weekly paper, wrote stories for a bunch of dailies, the Hearst papers. I don't know how many listeners can are familiar with the Connecticut area. I know Stony Brook's right off the ferry there, but
our signal does reach into southern Connecticut, so there are people who Whalers
should
fans
carry
sure
across the
out
sound there.
But the great thing about this,
so they're obviously.
Go ahead.
No, yeah.
Is
the fact that the team won't die. I was covering. It's the idea sort of came to me. I went to college in Connecticut, and you alluded to it, Matt, with the Hurricanes winning the Cup, and that sort of piqued my interest. I was in college, and I was like, this team they were the Whalers. I was in Connecticut, and the Hurricanes won the Cup, and in a fascinating series. I wrote about some of it is the 06 Cup Final is prominently featured in a chapter about the Hurricanes, the penultimate chapter of the book. And I think I was fascinated by that. So that sort of piqued my interest in the first place. And then I moved, started writing, covering high school sports. And this is what I tell everybody is I started covering high school sports in Connecticut in 2008. And all the high school kids were wearing Whalers hats and Whalers sweatshirts and Whalers jerseys. And they, the kids were toddlers in some of them when the team moved. And I was fascinated because, you go to the mall and back when brick and mortar used to be super relevant, but you'd go to the mall in Connecticut and, the sporting goods store or the sports clothing store would be outfitted with all sorts of Whalers stuff. And, the Whalers logo is everywhere in Connecticut. One of the pictures that I had submitted, fortunately, was from Bradley Airport in Hartford, outside of Hartford. And they have a huge display, regularly always have a huge display of Whalers memorabilia, hats, shirts, logo merchandise. And I think, it's one of those things that the logo is fantastic, and the color scheme is unique, and the whole there's a kitsch to the team that I think is what is still enduring here. It's not like people are it's like people are pining to watch Nick Kypreos skate up and down the ice for the Hartford Whalers too much, but it's the logo and the brass bonanza and the jersey and some of the color scheme and stuff like that. So I think that piqued my interest, and then I just started in the project. Just started talking to people, talking to fans, booster club members, ex-players, and it sort of took off here when I started covering the league in 2013. And it's funny, writing a book is a tricky proposition because it's obviously a very long process. And when I start, I'm still not very well known by a lot of people. And I sort of picked it up and put it down and did interviews and would, I'd go to they have a weekend up in Hartford still at the minor league ballpark, Dunkin' Donuts Park. They do the Whaler weekend for the Yard Goats, the AA team up there. And I go up there a couple times and talk to some players and mingle and network. And then all of a sudden, I had like 250 pages worth of stuff done, and submitted it and got a contract and finished it. And it was actually delayed a year, which is, I think, the fascinating part. It was supposed to come out last October, and the pandemic pushed it back a year. And now it's going to come out October 1st. So I say it's one of the greatest. I don't even know how I did it because it's been 10 years from start to finish in terms of, when my first interview was Ken Holland in the fall of 2011. And now the book is coming out October 1st, 2021. So it's about 10 years from first interview to release.
Ken Holland, of course,
Mm-hmm.
Stanley Cup winning coach of the Detroit Red Wings, but had a history in Hartford as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to work with his son, Brad, at NHL.com, where you worked too.
College with him.
We didn't work at the same time, though.
Yeah, I went to I went to college with Brad. Brad actually was my sports editor when I was in college, which actually is how I got Kenny, was from Brad. Brad, and it's funny, you sent him I sent Brad a text or a message, and he's like, sure. Ken Holland called me the next day, and like you said, Ken Holland. It was so long ago that Ken Holland was the GM of the Red Wings, and he asked me. He said, I just want to make sure to be clear here that you're not putting me on the spot to ask about my opinions of Hartford as a market, because there was some rumblings back then about Howard Baldwin had returned and was trying to make inroads with getting the team back, and they had they were pushing a little they were gaining a little momentum to try and get the NHL back in Hartford, and so Kenny was trying to make sure that I wasn't getting a scoop with him to talk. And it's funny because Kenny only played there 1 year. Ken Holland, he was a goalie, and he's not actually quoted in the book, but he just was the first interview I did and got the ball rolling, and it's sort of amazing how the process just took off from there.
Yeah, Ken Holland, general manager. I'll correct myself, of the Detroit Red Wings, and then no, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was interested, too, in just hearing this process unravel, because you said you alluded to a big weekend get-together that happened a couple of years ago. Was that really the backbone of getting a lot of these quotes and even more background data, or were you able to meet people throughout the years? What was it like establishing those relationships with some of the greatest ever played the game of hockey?
It's it's remarkable because to some degree, yes, the Whalers weekend in Hartford is a big thing as far as getting people who are sort of outside the game. The Babbages, Dave and Wayne Babbage are always there, and Mike Rogers, and it's interesting because when you cover the league, there's a lot of I wrote a story about this a bunch of years ago for the New York Times, and there's a stunning number of high profile coaches and general managers and And, go down the list. Ron Francis is the GM in Seattle now, and Joel Quenneville is the coach in Florida now. And Kevin Dineen was the coach in Florida. He's now the coach in San Diego for the American League affiliate of the Ducks. And you start gaining relationships with public relations officer. And that's the interesting thing is that, I reach out to PR directors or, PR associates or what have you. And every former player, no matter who it was, Dave Tippett, the coach of the Coyotes at the time. Now he's the coach of the Edmonton Oilers. Right. They're all willing, and they all want to tell the stories. They all want to talk about their history at Hartford. It's not like there's this whole group of people who played there. It's not like it wasn't just like a stop on the map. Like if you talk to former players about certain areas they used to play, certain teams they used to play, it's way more important to them than just stop in their career. That some of Ron Francis and Kevin Dineen, they met their wives in Connecticut, Hartford. Wow. And they were Connecticut born, both of them. And Joel Quenneville's wife is from Connecticut, and they had a softball team in the summertime where they would they'd hang around all year. And they became part of the community. And the community was real small. It still is pretty small, but they were the only professional act in town. UConn basketball wasn't quite what it has become. UConn, men or women, and so they were the pro act in town, and they became rock stars up there. And one of those it's not just those guys, but I think the funny thing is that it's not just Ron Francis. It's not just Joel Quenneville. It's not just Kevin Dineen. It's everybody. The guys go back there for that Whaler weekend because they still have friends there. They still have, guys who have played there 40 years ago when they were just coming into the NHL. So it's an amazing story, and it's a fascinating topic because and it's amazing because the brand doesn't die. The Hurricanes have leaned into it. They started wearing the Whalers logo on the ice in recent years, and got some feedback, from the Hurricanes people on that. And it's an interesting that Peter Carmanos, who moved the team out of Hartford to Carolina, wouldn't go back and put on the uniform. But once Tom Dundon, took over as majority owner of the Hurricanes, he said, we have to do this. And it became a big deal, big celebration. So, so I mean, yes, the Whaler weekends are important. I mean, that's why I've gone in the past, obviously there wasn't one last year because of the pandemic, but before that, 18 and 19, I was up there and planning to go up there in a couple weeks too. But it's integral to get that, but there's a lot, it's just a stunning number of Whalers alumni in the high ranking, Dean Evison, there was 2/3 of the Jack Adams finalists were former Whalers. It was Quenneville and Dean Evison, and then Rod Brindamore, who coaches the Hurricanes. So it was really a Whalers trifecta there.
You want to talk about some of the best coaches in the NHL today? You just listed them. That's the Joel Quenneville with Florida now. Surprising many, helping lead them to just a first round appearance. Overall. Yeah, Rod Brindamore, of course. Yeah, now as well, doing a tremendous job.
Just got an extension.
That's right. Well earned one at that.
Yes.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Quenneville, of course, let's not forget, won 2 cups with the Blackhawks.
3 cups with the Blackhawks.
3. Correction, 3. There you go.
You're right. At least 2.
Well, yes, 3. But no, I was thinking about the first 2 in particular because that was unprecedented in Blackhawks history because they had Hull and Makita, and they only won 1 cup in 61. But Kane and Taves, they won 3. But in any case, how far back does the book go? Because, of course, the history of the Whalers is that they were one of the WHA teams that joined the NHL when the 2 leagues merged in 79-80, which the bonus was Gordie Howe came with them. And they were the New England Whalers, and they really were because they bounced around a little bit. They were up in Matthews Arena, which was on Northeastern's campus. That's basically a cradle of Boston sports because the Red Sox, their original home was there. The Bruins played Matthews Arena. The Celtics played in Matthews Arena. And the Whalers played Matthews Arena. But continuing on to there, they moved to Hartford, joined the NHL. Do you talk about the WHA history at all?
Of course, you have to. I talked with 3 of the 4 founding owners from the team. It was Howard Baldwin, it was John Coburn, and oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I got to remember who Godfrey Wood was the 3rd founding owner. I got to speak with 3 of them. So the book touches the founding. Actually, one of the funny stories that I think one of them I think it was Godfrey Wood, because he was one of the guys who, with Howard, fielded the phone call from the guys, the founders of the WHA. They actually asked, do they play hockey in New England when they were trying to found a team as you alluded, in Boston. So yeah, it covers the whole history of the team. It starts with their founding in Boston, obviously, and then Howard Baldwin struck a deal to move them to Hartford, and in the interim, they were in Springfield, in Massachusetts. They were playing. They're playing at the Big E, just the dilapidated old hockey rink on the campus of the fairgrounds in Springfield. They moved into the Civic Center, and then like you alluded, they touches the WHA, which was kind of a disaster of a league in terms, just because if you look back at it's kind of like the ABA or the AF. The AFL is obviously way more successful, but it's kind of like the ABA, where it was sort of this ragtag league where they tried to throw a bunch of money at guys to get them there, and you hear all the stories of teams going bankrupt before they were even able to take the ice, or teams that moved mid-season, or teams that folded mid-season. The Indianapolis Racers folded 25 games into the last season. But, they weren't the only ones.
And they had Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, and then, Skelbania, sells the Gretzky to Edmonton, and the rest in Edmonton is history. But it covers the full scope of from the founding of the WHA through the merger, through the high flying 80s years, and into the it's funny because I always think that the 1990 Whalers, and I don't know how many people listening would care about this, but the 90 Whalers were just this team, sort of star-crossed team that could have kept the team there. They had a 2-1 lead on the Bruins, who ultimately went to the Cup final that year. They had a 2-1 lead in the series. They were up 5-2 after 2 periods in Game 4, and blew the lead and lost in regulation, lost in 7 games. And the Bruins were playing without Raymond Bourque that year in the for the first, basically for the 5 middle games 2 through 6 of that series. And everybody I talked to remembers that game 4 in Hartford, where they had the chance to put the Bruins on the ropes. They were up 5-2 after 2 periods, and gave up 4 in the third, and lost in regulation, and then they ended up losing the series in 7 games. And it's just and then through the 90s and the Pierre Maguire fiasco, and again, talked to Peter Karmanos about moving the team out of Hartford and moving them into Carolina, and getting his perspective, and getting some perspective of the politicians up there, because John Rowland always gets blamed for moving them, or for kicking them out from the team's perspective, and obviously people, there's no love lost between Hartford and Peter Karmanos, but and then again, the story goes through the Hurricanes Cup championship in 2006, because I fascinated by that, the fact that I found there was a Whaler jersey on the ice the night they won the Stanley Cup in Carolina in Game 7, and it's just, if you go back, and there's a clip on YouTube of the celebration, and someone's on the ice wearing a Whalers jersey, a green Whalers jersey. And it's amazing to me that, again, you go that far. And that team, had been history for almost 10 years at that point, and then they're gone. And then then it covers some of Howard's return, and obviously the current state of the team in the future, and potentially in Hartford, where It's not looking good. Obviously, again, the nostalgia piece is very important, and obviously, the book has to cover the nostalgia piece because that's the lasting memory of the Whalers. But there's people up there trying. The Booster Club is trying to get more members and trying to get more interest. There's some politicians who are semi-serious about refurbishing the building and trying to get the building to be an NHL caliber building. But obviously, it's way down the list, especially with an expansion team in Seattle coming.
Yeah,
and
that was something I want to touch on with you as well.
Yeah.
What was it writing this book? Because during the duration, 10 years just about, there's been a couple of expansion teams, right? 2 or 3. I think Atlanta, I think, had just moved to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, obviously, the Vegas joins in, 2016? And now the Kraken, 2017. And again, they had a historical first year. And obviously, the Kraken are on tap right after the finals wrap up, which is probably going to be tomorrow, in all honesty. But, with that, what was that like? Well, for you as a writer and also just as a fan of hockey, seeing that while getting all these testimonies and seeing all this fanfare for Hartford?
It's interesting because the story changed quite a bit. When I first started, it was going to be about, Hartford trying to get the team. It was going to be about, the story was always going to be about the Whalers in the Whalers history. And then, sort of took off with the nostalgia piece again, where they've, the fact that it's coming out now is pretty perfect because I was trying to get it out years ago and pitching publishers and agents and what have you, and it didn't take off. But the fact that first off, the story obviously weaves in and out because there was like you alluded to, Atlanta had just moved to Winnipeg, and Howard Baldwin really thought that if Hartford had responded sooner, that instead of Winnipeg, the Thrashers could have ultimately moved to Hartford, which, it could be a pipe dream. It could just be, what he thinks. He loves Hartford. But, he said that. So, and like you said, back in the day, there were, maybe 5 years ago, there were, hedge funders from Connecticut trying to buy the Coyotes and move them to Seattle. So that was the extent of Connecticut's involvement. Was, I believe, a Greenwich-based, or there were some groups too that were trying to ultimately found the Kraken, or the team that became the Kraken. And they were Connecticut based. They were more interested again in Seattle than they were obviously in Hartford. And so the story, obviously with facts, when things change and how it's been sort of as a fan of the NHL and as a coverer of the league, it's been sort of fascinating to watch through both the author lens and the fan lens, and obviously the NHL writer lens. Where the trends come, you see different trends, you see different, things evolve, and you see some of the, like you said, Vegas gets a team, and then Seattle was obviously always going to be next, and it seems like the markets are pretty healthy at this point, despite what some of the people in Hartford would have you believe, like you said with Quenneville in Florida, and they sort of had a rink referendum pretty recently. And then obviously Carolina, which was a sick team. The one team I was always curious about was the Islanders potentially, because 3 teams in the greater New York area is tricky, but that obviously finally got squashed because of the arena at Belmont Park, which it looks beautiful. It seems pretty exciting. Excited to get out there at some point, hopefully next year. But yeah, it's interesting to watch how the sport evolves, how the arenas evolve, how the economics evolve, and because when they were talking about it 10 years ago, they were hoping it would be $100 million of public money and $100 million of an owner's money, and that would be enough to entice an owner to move a team. And then now it's more like $200 million.
It ballooned up.
Yeah. So and obviously there's the people in Seattle put up $650 million. So each other team is going to be worth at least that, or the thought is.
More,
and Tom Dunn.
I alluded to it.
Yeah, 51. Tom Dundon just purchased 51% of the Hurricanes for like $420 million like 3 years ago. So it's people don't realize Peter Carmano is actually still a minority owner of the team. I think he's like 49% of the team. So, but yeah, so but 400, like I said, $420 million for Tom Dundon to buy like 50 some odd percent of the team. So, you do the math. That tells you what the Hurricanes are worth right now.
Yeah,
I alluded to it in the beginning. That the Whalers, the Hartford market, is sandwiched between two large markets, Boston and New York.
Yes.
And at the time, when Karmanos was considering moving the team, that was a big problem because of TV coverage, cable deals. Nesson versus MSG, etc. That going on. So that was an influencing factor, if I recall correctly. Then you correct me on this, why the team moved. Basically, the question is what went wrong. It had a solid fan base, not a strong history on the ice. As you said, it was the Hartford Whalers equivalent to the Expos Blue Monday. And yes, there are a lot of parallels between the two. Between the Hartford Whalers and Montreal Expos. But the point still is that a fan base that has not seen a game played in Hartford in almost 25 years, but still remains loyal, when the Hurricanes come into town, whether they play the Rangers, Devils, or Islanders, you see people with Whalers jerseys. So they're still there. What went wrong?
I would, the working title I was working with was The Perfect Storm, because that's really what I wanted to call the book. And then obviously, publishers get involved and they don't want to name it The Perfect Storm after the obvious, famous, novel turned movie. But it really was a remarkable confluence of events where obviously the Ron Francis trade gets a ton of publicity, and deservedly so, because trading one of the greatest players in the history of the league, and if it was just Francis, it would be one thing, but it was Ulf Samuelsson, and then it was for John Cullen and Charlie Zalapsky, and John Cullen turned into nothing essentially. He was traded within a couple of years, and Zalapsky, shortly thereafter as well. So that led to sort of ambivalence among the fan base. Tune people out. The rise of UConn cannot be discredited, because UConn basketball took off and essentially became the pro sports team in Connecticut, right? The women's basketball team and the men's, because the women's undefeated season was 95, the same year that there was a lockout in the NHL, and
that didn't help.
And that. Yeah, and so they had captured the region's imagination, and shortly thereafter, the men, Jim Calhoun's teams were in the regional final, and then ultimately we're going to win the national the first national championship in '99. They won it, but They were sort of again capturing the imagination of the people, and you said it, Matt, where there's a finite number of entertainment dollars to go around, and you're already in, tucked right there. The Giants make pretty good inroads up in that area because of, a bunch. Yeah. And then obviously the Patriots were flirting with Hartford in the mid to late 90s, or late 90s really. Which gets blamed to some degree, where the governor up there was some thought that maybe he put all of his eggs into getting the Patriots basket and getting the Patriots to Hartford, and then before they obviously stayed in Foxborough. But the product on the ice was terrible when in the mid to in the early to mid 1990s, like I said, once the Francis trade happened, and then they made the playoffs last in 1992, and played an epic 7-game series, and then they were terrible. They were just an afterthought because the teams were so bad, and there were other factors in play there, because the team was bad, and then Richard Gordon, who skirts some of the blame because he ultimately sold the team, but he was leveraged up to his eyes in terms of dollars and could not, essentially was drowning in debt, and essentially sold off all of his leverage to the state of Connecticut to forgive him some of the debt he was accruing. So in terms of, they didn't make parking revenue. They didn't make, they sold the luxury boxes to the state in exchange for debt forgiveness. They didn't make, they said parking. They didn't, there weren't a lot of, alternative revenue sources other than the tickets, because Richard Gordon had sold them all off. And then he sold the team off. So, and then, Karmanos brought this up, and it's fascinating. You mentioned the TV deal, Matt, where, the rumor that was circulating was that Howard Baldwin actually negotiated the TV deal. And, they were negotiating it around the time they drafted Ron Francis. It was in 1981. And so Howard Baldwin negotiated a 20-year TV contract for the Whalers and pocketed the money. So there goes your leverage in terms of, they had a 20-year deal with Sportsnet or Sports Channel in New England, which actually, broadcast them until the end. And that was it. They didn't have any, like you said, as cable TV became more lucrative, as skyboxes became more lucrative, to the point where, and their attendance went completely to hell in the later years. And then the last season they had a ticket drive. And what's fascinating about this, and Jeff Jacobs, the great columnist in Connecticut and who covered the Whalers for forever, told me that Karmanos did not receive dollars for the luxury boxes sold. And if you look at the final season attendance in Hartford, it says it's about 13,700 fans per average per game. But Karmanos wouldn't count the luxury boxes sold because he didn't make money on them, and it made the attendance look worse than it actually was. So they actually had an average attendance of more than 14,000 per game, but Karmanos wouldn't count it because he wasn't getting the money from the luxury boxes. So yeah, so it's one more dig at Hartford on the way out. But so and he wanted to move them to Columbus. And actually, was about to move to Columbus, and then the arena deal they had fell through. So, and the story of Carolina was a disaster, but yeah, so, it was a confluence of events, like I said, where the team was bad, the team was terrible. They were drowning in debt, and Karmanos, was trying to get a new arena built. He swears he was, good faith, did everything he could, tried to keep the team there. People in Connecticut, you could draw your own conclusions, but he swears that it was the governor, John Rowland, who kicked them out. And but there's not one factor. I just wrote a 280-page book about why the team left, and it's all that.
But that's a good reason to buy the book. We will repeat the title. Yes. The Whalers, The Rise, Fall, and Enduring Mystique of New England's second greatest NHL franchise. Author Pat Pickens, who we're talking to right now. We're talking about, and there's an ironic twist to all this, because Karmanos moves to Carolina, and you can make a very good argument that the franchise ended up in worse shape as a result.
Ultimately, potential. Well, it's hard to say that, because ultimately maybe, but at first they were. Greensboro was a nightmare, and there's some touch on that in the book. Again, you can't leave out the Hurricanes. I didn't feel I could leave out the Hurricanes without. I don't think I could tell the story of the Whalers without touching on the fact that the Carolina Hurricanes won the Stanley Cup.
True.
and that I believe is what's keeping them in Carolina, frankly, because the last team to win the Stanley Cup and then leave was I believe it was the original Ottawa Senators. I wrote it in the book.
That's almost 100 years ago.
Forgetting it. Yeah. So, so teams that win the cup don't move. It's not like the NFL where the Rams can just pack up and go to LA after being in St. Louis. But yeah, so I think, there's the tie there. And then, and what's, Karmanos' group, which included Jim Rutherford and Tom Thews, which, Tom Thews is an important person in this equation because Thews was the big financial backer for Karmanos, and when he died, Karmanos is, he's in fine shape financially, but Thews' death actually, coincided with the Hurricanes falling off a cliff, because they didn't have the deeper financial pockets to throw into the team, but that's not in the book. But Karmanos was a team. And he said going to Greensboro was a colossal mistake, and it was a disaster because, I don't know how many people, again, know the region, but, Greensboro and Raleigh are about 90 miles away, and the team had moved to Raleigh, but they were playing in Greensboro, and they were making the the players, the support staff, the coaching staff. It was essentially, it's sort of Springfield to Hartford on steroids. So, every night they would practice, they'd have a morning skate in Raleigh, and then they would drive out to Greensboro. And then they would, after games were over, they'd drive back to Raleigh where they were all living. So, but again, it was a disaster. There were, a few thousand fans every night for the games. And just no atmosphere. They were, completely different markets. They called Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and the Triad, as opposed to the Triangle in Raleigh and Durham and Cary and all those places down in the Raleigh region. So, but ultimately, again, Karmanos had the deep pockets. He and Jim Rutherford was the general manager. He made some shrewd deals. They always say the Chris Pronger for Brendan Shanahan trade, which was part of which some in Hartford believe was the last real, death knell, or the last real knife in the team in terms of moving out of Hartford. But that trade ultimately led to Rod Brindamore going to Carolina, who was the captain, which they all believe led to the championship team in Carolina. And, so they go to the Cup final in 2002 in this sort of Cinderella run with Kevin Weeks and Archer Zerbe and a bunch of other, again, misfit type characters. And then they come out of the lockout and are flying. They're this high flying team in 2006. They catch every break you can catch in 2006. They get the puck over the glass. I'm sure you remember all this, Matt. The puck over the glass penalty in Game 7 against the Buffalo series. They get Dwayne Rolliston's injury in Game 1 of the Edmonton series. And they win this cup in 7 games, and they have this absurd sort of, celebration with it's not absurd. Absurd is the wrong word, but it's unique for hockey history with a tractor and with cheerleaders and some of that stuff. So it was very unique.
It's the antithesis of what Hartford was, and for that matter, really the rest of the NHL. And again, with the Hurricanes now, obviously the Storm Surge, for example, was a celebration, really one of the first major ones that kind of introduced, something to acknowledge the fans after the games and things like that. But again, something where you didn't really see in Hartford or much of the NHL was Carolina getting an identity as kind of the redheaded stepchild sort of the NHL, where they were all characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I spoke with some of the marketing guys down there because I was fascinated by it, because again, they were obviously the NBA has been doing it for years, but they were one of the first teams to don the jersey of their former team in a game. It's not like they were selling, you might see vintage shirts sold on a website or you could do it obviously in the EA sports games. You could be the Colorado, if you're a Devils fan, you could be the Colorado Rockies. You could wear those jerseys in a game. But, Carolina did it. And they said that some of the stuff, the Storm Surge was organic with Brindamore. And then they leaned into the bunch of jerk stuff with Don Cherry later that year, and then they went to the conference final, which obviously took a bunch of people along the ride there. But they were looking at that Whalers, and they had 2 games against the Bruins. They wore the Whalers jersey, and the first one was December 23rd, 2018. And they said it was going to be their Super Bowl because they had been out of the playoffs for almost 10 years at that point. And they were, they needed something to be identifiable to the rest of the league, like you said. And they had, John Flynn, was their play-by-play commentator. Now, it's going to Seattle. He's great. He's a great resource. He's a good friend in terms of, helping out with this project. And just, he was the MC of the night, talked with, basically went through Whalers history. And it's fascinating because, I said, some of the Hurricanes fans where you see the jersey at Hurricanes games or you see the T-shirts or the hats, but it's not like people in Carolina are pining for this, right? They want to be Hurricanes fans. They don't need a history lesson per se. But I think what's, to see it as a celebration of the Hartford Whalers. And again, Mike Rogers, who was a great, a great point producer in their early days in the early 80s, was on hand. He dropped the puck, the ceremonial puck for the first, before the game, and was in the booth with Trip Tracy and John Forsland on TV. And it was a celebration of Hartford and again, without really much, without much, on the horizon for Carolina at that point. But then it took off. The Whaler fans are finicky too, because some of them loved it. Some of them hated, obviously, the Hurricanes wearing the jersey, but some of them loved it too, because they loved seeing the uniform on the ice.
Oh, yeah.
And
it'll be the first time after a while too, right?
Sure. Yeah. So it was the first time it had been the first time in more than 20 years at that point. So some of them loved it. The Booster Club had a big get together for those. And then obviously the game in Boston, but there was not without controversy. Obviously Jack Edwards was not happy with Dougie Hamilton wearing Pi McKenzie's number, but story for a different day. But yeah, it was one of those. And then you look at what that led to, because the Avalanche wore the Nordique jerseys this year as part of one of their retro uniforms. So yes, and then the Hurricanes had a different Whalers jersey that they wore this year. So and then obviously some of the stuff took off. So it's an interesting development. And like I said, the book's coming out at the perfect time, because if it had come out 5 years earlier, then it wouldn't have all of these little touches about the Hurricanes and the Whalers. The Hurricanes leaning into it, because it would just be Carmanos owning the team. And so it's been a fascinating ride, an exciting project. I'm excited to share it with everybody.
It starts a trend too, because you want to cite a perfect example. There's, first of all, several teams who have moved and changed their name, changed their colors. A lot of them don't like to acknowledge their previous history.
Yes.
Perfect example, the Washington Nationals. They are trying to co-opt the Washington Senators' history, when the Senators, of course, are the Minnesota Twins. This seems to have started a little bit of a trend where you acknowledge the fact that, yes, you were in another city and played under a different name and had a different fan base, but there were some players who made the transition, obviously. And I don't think the Carolina Hurricanes fans should ignore the fact that their franchise once had Gordie Howe. Gordie Howe made the transition from the NHL to the WHA, as a lot of players did. They followed the money. And then, through no fault of his own, finds himself back in the NHL for one final year.
Yeah. I one of the biggest regrets of the book is that I didn't get to talk to Gordie Howe.
He passed on.
I spoke with Mark. I spoke with Mark Howe, And Mark Howe was a great resource for numerous reasons. But, Mark Howe had a pretty great, a Hall of Fame career. And just to get his perspective, get some stories from him about, playing on the same line as his dad. And then, again, him getting traded out of Hartford. It seems like there's this trend of guy goes to Hartford, great player, and then ultimately gets traded. And Mark Howe it was a bizarre injury that led to his undoing up there. But you're right. Bobby Hull was a trade deadline acquisition in the Hartford Whalers in their first year in the NHL. Pi McKenzie again was a member of the had his number retired again from the Hartford Whalers, and they all talk about they meaning some the people who both did Hartford and did Carolina, the people I spoke with, and they all said that the Hurricanes really arrived. They signed Ron Francis to a contract. I think it was in 1998. I think it was a 4-year contract. And they all said that was when they gained credibility because they wanted Ron Francis to be there sort of not as necessarily as a tie to Hartford, but he's a great player. He's a Hall of Fame player. He's one of the greatest players to ever play the game. And the idea was that if Ron Francis was going to play in Carolina, then you could convince other people to play in Carolina. So it was, and then obviously he was the major linchpin member of that team that went to the Cup Finals in 2002, and Peter Kamalos gave him a Stanley Cup ring in 2006 because he had been in the organization and ultimately became the GM in Carolina and then obviously he's now the GM in Seattle. But yeah, I think the history of the Whalers is pretty remarkable. Again, they won the Avco Cup their first year in the WHA, and played for it again. I believe one other time. I think it was the last season of WHA, and then did not. But they won one playoff series in their NHL history, and they went to the playoffs. I believe 8 years and won one playoff round. So and then this is the team that we're all still. Hearing about, reading about, talking about, the team that refuses to die. Yeah. The uniform. But again, why? Because it's the kitsch, it's the jersey, it's the brass bonanza. We haven't even talked about
there's no doubt about
bonanza.
it. A perfect example.
Oh, yeah.
You and I both know Brian Compton.
Yes.
Okay, from the NHL office. He is a writer for NHL.com. He's spent most of his time covering the Islanders as of late, but he's covered other teams as well. Well, one of the ringtones on his phone is Brass Bonanza. And I know this because I'm in the office one day and I hear it. And I'm like, who that? But it comes out of the strangest places.
Yep.
And yes, it is part of the kitsch. Something interesting. Because Hartford, of course, especially back then, because with no UConn. Well, other weird things about Hartford. The Hartford Civic Center is part of a mall, and one day the roof fell in.
Before.
Yes.
That
Yep.
was part of the Whalers' history too.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that if not for that roof collapse, we might not even be talking about the team. The team might have gone the way of the Toronto Toros or the Houston Aeros. Because it's one of the fascinating things that I learned from the story. Everybody knows, or everybody, the people who follow the history of the Hartford Whalers know that the roof collapsed in January of 1978. But the arena at the time was a 10,500 seat. They called it the Civic Center Coliseum because, like you said, there was the Civic Center Mall. And then there was the Coliseum, which was the arena, the adjacent arena
right
to the mall. And so the roof collapses. They made this incredible roof that was supposed to look spectacular from above. When you look at it from above in an airplane or from aerial shots. but it wasn't strong enough. And obviously you're in Hartford, Connecticut. The winters up there are pretty treacherous with snow and ice and what have you. And so the roof collapses, and Howard Baldwin lobbies the corporate community, which I think is really, again, one of the more fascinating aspects of the Whalers story is also, doesn't get touched on a lot, is that essentially the Whalers were managed by Howard Baldwin. He was their managing general partner, but the finances came from essentially a consortium of corporations that were based in Hartford, and it was, mostly insurance companies, Aetna and Travelers and the Hartford and some of those big insurance corporations that we all know, but also the Hartford's Current, which is still the newspaper of record in Hartford, owned shares in the team, was extremely minority owner in the team. So and they ceded the day-to-day operation to Howard Baldwin, who would hire the GM, who would hire the coach, fire the coach, which he did a lot of hiring and firing in his early days in the NHL. But so Howard goes and he lobbies the corporate community, and he says, I need money to build to spruce up our arena, and they give him a bunch of money, and he makes the 10,500 seat arena a 14,000 seat arena. So when the NHL and WHA are negotiating teams, they say, well, and then Howard's also negotiating deal between the WHA and the NHL, because he had worked with Ed Snyder as a member of, as a business manager of the Philadelphia Flyers, one of their minor league teams in I believe it was Trenton, New Jersey. But so he negotiates the terms. He again gets this 14,500 seat arena roughly, and that's an NHL sized building. If not for the roof collapse, then they have this 10,500 seat arena, which would not be good enough to get an NHL team into Hartford. So, it's one of those fascinating little detailed stories that I heard, that that Howard told me, that where it's really just remarkable. It's amazing, because as perfect as almost preordained as their exit from the NHL seems, is how almost miraculous their entrance in the NHL was in the first place. Because people in Connecticut were not. It was not a hockey market then per se. Boston was a hockey market. New York, with the original six team, and it wasn't Canada. It was the only non-Canadian team to join from the WHA merger. So I love the story. I think I said it to somebody a few weeks ago that it's the most fascinating story, and I believe, in the history of professional sports, because there's no team like the Hartford Whalers, and there probably won't ever be a team like the Hartford Whalers. And like you said, maybe the Expos, but the Expos history is so intertwined with the 1994 strike, whereas the Whalers sort of, had this, sort of high rise in the 80s, and then, but they continue to live on. They, people want to buy the jersey, they want to buy the hat. The jersey and the hat are on, the jersey's on the ice. So that's my belief.
There's a band by the name of Two Man Advantage. No, the Zambonis. They're two hockey-related.
Yes.
The Zambonis. And this, one of the guys wears green Cooperalls. And the Cooperall was long pants that covered the pads and stuff like that, instead of the short pants hockey players usually wear. Basically the same type of pants officials wear. Mm-hmm. The Flyers used them, and the Whalers used them. The only two teams that did.
That's funny, because it's one of those things that I didn't get to cover. It was the Cooperalls, but it is something that they're known for. But it's not something that made it into the story, because again, there's so much else. There's so much else to cover. I couldn't quite sneak that in there, because like you said, the Flyers also wore them.
Yeah, but they're basically, to visualize it, the same kind of pants officials wear. But Pat Pickens, author of the Whalers, the rise, fall, and enduring mystique of New England's second greatest NHL franchise. It's been a pleasure. Great having you on. And, yeah, hey, when next season rolls around, we definitely want to get your commentary in other areas of hockey, too. But this is a great book. It's available on Amazon. Will not be physically available until October 1st. But you can place your order now. Get it. I want it. I want a copy. So, it's a great story. Followed it when it was happening. I'd love to see this all put together. And, again, congratulations on getting it published. And when we get closer to the release, we'll promote it even further.
That's great. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Have a great Sunday night.
Thank you very
Pat.
much.
Thanks, boys.
Okay. So it's 11:55. And that's why we had to give ourselves a couple more minutes before midnight because, we'll probably do something on the Islanders next week if I get Peter Schwartz on, because Peter Schwartz and I spent a lot of time covering the team. But we have plenty of time to kill in the summertime. But the important thing here, too, is that we have a very weird NBA final setup. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning basically proving to the world that their series with the Islanders was the de facto Stanley Cup final.
Right.
Yeah, and it's very rare, matter of fact, never, that we talk about winter sports in July. So there we go.
Yeah. No, you slipped up saying NBA Finals, but two very weird finals on tap right now. First for the Stanley Cup, as Tampa Bay Lightning. We all expected them to be there, and again, it really feels like watching the finals with Montreal, who really upset everyone in the postseason. The clock's not yet midnight, but it's just about there. It really looks like Lightning's gonna wrap up this series in 4, and they just overpowered Montreal from the opening whistle. And if last game scoring 2 goals in under 2 minutes wasn't enough to sell you, I don't know what will. I mean, this Lightning team, it's really, we haven't seen many dynasties in the NHL. We're really going back, maybe the Devils in the early 2000s, maybe the Blackhawks a decade ago, but they're on the verge of having a dynasty. You pretty much already have the equivalent of a dynasty in NHL terms already.
Well,
again, it's interesting too.
Again, we're talking about the Blackhawks. I sold them short a number of cups they wanted to Joel Quenneville. You see teams win a cup, blow it up to get under the cap again, and then rise back up, win another cup, shave off a little more salary. But that seems to be the trend in the NHL. Seeing a team win back-to-back has become so rare. Yeah. And seeing a team stay intact, because the Islanders are going to have cap issues too. So we may not see the same Islander team in UBS Arena come October. But
well, no, it could be
the NHL is simply not configured to sustain dynasties.
Outside of the Penguins, who won a back-to-back 15-17, it was those Isles in the 80s that last won consecutive cups. And even then it was 4. Actually, sorry, it was the Oilers in the late 80s, but still. You haven't seen dynasties since the 80s, And it's interesting, too, because we lose to NBA Finals, but you've seen an inverse of that, where you go from the Warriors dynasty of the mid-2010s to now 2 teams that haven't been to the finals, the Suns since 93 and the Bucks since, the 70s of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, it has been fascinating to watch these 2 sports over the past couple months and just how unpredictable these playoffs have been.
That is true. And things will get back to normal next season, but for now, we just cherish what could be the last game of the entire season for the NHL tomorrow in Montreal. Carey Price's last stand for the Canadiens this season. And of course, with the NBA Finals,
you know what, though?
And Devin Booker.
I want to get commented about Carey Price. He's been getting blamed for the lack of success in the final here with the Canadians. And
really should.
Let's be honest.
Oh, please.
Take a look at
That
what
is
the
just
Islanders
a logo.
defense did to back up Varlamov. How many second chance goals did Tampa Bay get against the Islanders versus the Canadians?
It's incredible, the inverse of that, where there was no really room for Tampa. Montreal, they can't not give up the puck to Tampa Bay. It's like they want them to score. Please score on our goalie. Is what
but
it
on
looks
rebounds
like last year,
too.
especially. Oh,
the rebounds have been murder. Where the midnight show is. But in the meantime, we'll talk a little bit further because, let's face it, we did not have enough time to talk about NBA or NHL. So here we are. This is WUSB Stony Brook. It's 12:03 right now. Now, when I get word to cut it off and let the next show take over, we'll do that. But we had Pat Pickens on, who is the author of what appears to be a great book on the Hartford Whalers. Not available till October. You can still order it on Amazon. But what's most important right now is that we are still talking about winter sports in July. And we have an unprecedented NBA Finals setup because I don't believe the Milwaukee Bucks and the Phoenix Suns have ever faced each other in the finals. They have not. And the Phoenix Suns have been to the finals. Charles Barkley was still with them back then. The Milwaukee Bucks have been to the NBA Finals when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was still Lou Alcindor. So, while the Suns have never won an NBA championship, the Bucks haven't won one in 50 years. And it was like the third or fourth year of their existence. Basically, start a franchise, get Oscar Robertson, get Lou Alcindor, and win. That was the formula. So, here we are. Giannis Antetokounmpo was actually, now, I have been following the conference final, but he had a couple of injury issues, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, and the surprising thing is they won without him those last two games. The majority of the folks, me included, thought the Bucks were done without Giannis, but Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, and several others really stepped up in place of Giannis, who was out with that leg injury.
Well, now what's his status for the finals?
Well, with the hyperextended left knee, he's probably missing. It's, of course, Coach Bud is saying it's day-to-day. Realistically, that's about a 7 or 14-day injury. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's gone game 1 or game 2.
7 to 14 days means he could be gone the whole series.
Well, most of it, yeah. But just with the trend of the NBA, they are not afraid to put him out if you're at least 51%. As we saw with James Harden playing on a sprained ACL, a grade 2 ACL tear, or ACL sprain rather. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. This is something I wanted to bring up because it does relate to the upcoming NBA Finals, and it's Chris Paul, Mike Vaccaro, once again, one of the best columnists in New York because he comes up with these great topics. And he's also a hell of a writer, but you get the idea. Albert Pujols is experiencing a bit of a rejuvenation with the Dodgers. But Chris Paul got the Phoenix Suns into the NBA Finals. Chris Paul was written off.
Oh, yes. You want to talk about guys playing with a chip on their shoulder. That defines Chris Paul. Just this postseason alone, he's had to battle a lot. Catching COVID, battling through injury, battling through a Suns team where they faced some injuries as well early on. If anything, he took it all in stride and proven he's one of the, if not the best leader in the NBA today. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who raises everyone's game on the court. it's Chris Paul. I mean, this guy can make anyone an incredible player.
But Mike's column can be summed up in 3 words, and he says it right at the end of it: "Old guys rule." And it showed you something. I mean, look, we can talk about veteran experience, and Chris Paul's not that old. He's only 36. But in NBA years, well, first of all, LeBron James isn't that old either, but because he started coming out of high school, and therefore his career is 4 years longer than, or 2 years, depending on how much time you spend in college, it's significantly longer than what you would expect an NBA career to be. He's considered old.
And he's the same age as Chris Paul.
Yeah. But, 18 years in the NBA, and he's 36.
Yeah, for Chris Paul, I mean, it's scary. The future of the league, you're going to see a lot more players who are maybe a bit older than they were in the past. Players who are 37, 38, opting to continue and keep going rather than retire, which is number one. And for guys like Chris Paul, this is his first NBA Finals in 16 years. This is the reason why you don't retire at 35, because this is the promised land for him. And he proved that not only does he deserve it, but he's earned being here with the team. I mean, doing it too against his old team in the Los Angeles Clippers, where he was relegated to being the number 2 and maybe even the number 3 behind Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. Okay, he was, when you talk about Lob City, you think about the dunks, not the guy throwing the dunks. But Chris Paul proved he was more than that, and proved he was more than what the Rockets and Thunder gave up to get him.
Well, here's what's even funnier. Where's Blake Griffin now? He's in Brooklyn, but he's not number 1. He's not number 2. He's not number 3. He's more like number 5.
DeAndre Jordan even lower than Blake Griffin. Honestly, when you got a healthy team, well, Dinwiddie's gone now, but assuming he was still healthy, Griffin's probably number 6. You got your big 3, Joe Harris, Dinwiddie.
Exactly. With Dinwiddie back, well, that's the other thing that we had to touch on with the Brooklyn Nets, is that, okay, they got as far as they did with the guys they had, plus Dinwiddie. What do you got? I think you got a lot more. Especially Dinwiddie. I've always liked Dinwiddie's work ethic. When he's healthy, he gives it his all. I mean, they all do, but you get the idea. Dinwiddie is a hard worker.
Of course.
So, and not only that, he made the Nets respectable before those guys got there.
That's right. It was him and Karis LeVert who really carried the team in terms of respect. And, that was after the D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin years. It was Dinwiddie who was originally the one, with Karis LeVert assisting him in the 1-2 spots. But he was really one of the more underrated guards until the Nets became one of the best teams in the league. He is really great from everywhere, from 3, really from inside, and his playmaking as well, could be akin to a younger Chris Paul. Not on the same level, of course, but the comparison's there.
Well, that's the thing you need to look forward to, or you can look forward to, as a fan of the Brooklyn Nets. And, of course, it's always good when both New York teams are good, and the Knicks will be good. Not quite there yet, though. They have a couple more pieces to put in. But still wondering what we're going to be doing here at 12:12. I have to send a text to someone.
If anything, I'm looking forward to, again, just continuing to preview the Suns-Bucks matchup. Again, these are 2 teams who, on paper this year, you would think, yeah, they got a shot. But I don't think they were anyone's number 1 outside of Milwaukee and Phoenix. And in terms of the brand of the teams, they're not 2 teams that come to mind when you think championship contenders, unlike the Lakers or Boston or I was saying New York, but not even them recently. Golden State, for example. Even Cleveland has found more success recently than Milwaukee and Phoenix up until these two teams made the finals. But there's a lot of youth, I think, it's something that's really fun. I don't think there's any active player who's won a previous final. So this is uncharted territory for everyone on both of these teams. Guys like Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, or in their third, fourth, fifth seasons, Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, those guys who don't really have that much experience compared to teams of the past. This is their first taste of what it's like to be in the finals.
Middleton showed us something.
Absolutely.
During the entire run, but particularly against the Nets, because we thought it was going to be Giannis's team. We thought the whole world, the Bucks' whole world was going to revolve around him, and it turned out not to be the case. It turned out to be really Middleton's team.
Yeah, and he proved that as well once Giannis went down. It was like a well-oiled machine. There were no flaws once Antetokounmpo went down because the Bucks turned to Middleton, who in turn were able to really share the ball more and play team ball and carry that to a finals appearance.
And as a result, they have a shot winning it all, which is nothing we didn't expect. We did not expect this team to advance one round beyond the Nets.
I was going to say, if you asked me back then when they had just given up that 25-point lead, if the Bucks were going to be in the final, asked a lot of folks, they would have said, no way. And that's despite the impressive roster. But as you said, Chris Middleton really delivered when it came through. As I said, that game 5, I remember, against Atlanta, he shot 50%, had 26 points, 13 rebounds. And even in the clincher, had 32 points. I mean, the dude was just unstoppable, especially from mid-range, which you don't see a lot of anymore, number one, and from three-pointer as well. This guy is a dangerous threat all over the floor, and he's shooting just under 50%. He's been shooting just under 50% for the past 2 seasons, still managing to grab about 6 boards per game.
Yeah, and we continue on, but what do you like? Who do you like in this? Obviously, both had very interesting paths to the finals. Both were not even part of the conversation when the regular season ended. Maybe the Bucks to a degree, but no one really expected them to go beyond maybe 2 rounds. A lot of people thought that, yes, they have one of the best overall players in the game, but the Nets have 3 of the best overall best players in the game.
And then 2 went down. 7.
Yeah. So the Bucks prevail. So surprise number 1. They get to the finals, surprise number 2. And the vibe you get is that a lot of people don't know what to make of it.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you're not seeing definite picks here. Oh, I think Bucks in 7. They flip a coin.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's been the key. It's been a lot of 6 or 7 for both teams. And I think that's made it more fun, because usually, again, with the Warriors dynasty, you usually knew for most of the time you're going to get Warriors in 4, Warriors in 5, Warriors in 6. And most of the time they did it. And even when the Cavaliers won in between, that took 7 games. And for the Raptors to win, that you saw the loss of key players in Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson for Golden State. So here you have, Giannis is out, but still most of the team's cores for both of these teams are healthy. And again, there's a lot of young talent here where this is their first time, and it's a whole different animal playing just compared to the rest of the postseason and the finals. So for me, I really think Chris Paul has been the best player of the playoffs. And to me, I think he's going to find a way to get his first championship. And it's not a slight against the Bucks. They're both 2 very tremendously talented teams. I think defensively the Bucks have the edge. But I think in terms of scoring, even that's close too because Chris Middleton can really step up. I think Chris Paul being the one veteran amongst all of these guys, being that elder statesman, is going to be enough of an edge to give Phoenix the push he needs to get their first title in a while.
Okay, so you got a pick?
I would say Suns, but it's got 6 or 7 because I can't.
Same thing.
I really can't. It's so close between both of these teams, but it's awesome. It makes for awesome drama. Number one, and awesome TV.
Okay, so we found out what's going on. So we will disconnect. We will say goodbye until next Sunday. And when I click this little button, you'll be hearing Purple Starlight. This is WUSB Stony Brook. Ken Fermin, Matt Mankiewich on the sports section, running a little late, but we are ready to make the transition. So we'll see you next week.